Friends, if you're excited to dive into a world where things are not always what they seem, where magic has a sinister twist, and where buttons instead of eyes hide deep secrets, then you're absolutely in the right place. Today we're talking about one of the most mesmerizing and spine-tingling animated films ever made, Coraline released in 2009. So if you love stories filled with mystery, adventure, and just the right amount of eerie charm, then make sure you stay with us right till the end. And if this is your first time visiting our channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more fascinating movie deep dives like this one. In today's video, we'll be exploring everything you need to know about Coraline, what makes it so unique, where you can watch it, and all the enchanting details that went into bringing this dark fantasy to life. We're going to break down the story, talk about the characters, and give you a mini review of what to expect if you haven't seen it yet, or maybe even convince you to watch it again if you have. But that's not all. We'll take a close look at the film's technical brilliance, how it was crafted using stop-motion animation, and the enormous effort behind every single frame. From pre-production planning to the final cut in post-production, we'll tell you how much time, talent, and creativity went into shaping Coraline's world. We'll also talk about the film's hauntingly beautiful music and sound design, how it adds layers of emotion and suspense, and how silence is sometimes used just as effectively as sound. Then, we'll move on to the budget and box office performance. Was Coraline a commercial hit, or just a cult favorite? How much did it cost to make a movie so detailed and labor-intensive? And how much did it end up earning worldwide? All of that will be covered in this video. Of course, we'll discuss the cast too. Who voiced which character, how their performances elevated the entire experience, and how the voice acting blends so seamlessly with the animation that it brings the characters to life in unforgettable ways. We'll dive into the fascinating roles, especially Coraline herself, and explore what makes each character so memorable, from the quirky neighbors to the chilling other mother. We'll even share some behind-the-scenes facts you might not know, like how long it took to make certain scenes, or what tricks the filmmakers used to achieve such a haunting atmosphere without relying on CGI. Coraline isn't just a movie, it's a labor of love, a piece of art, and a storytelling experience like no other. So whether you're a diehard fan or someone hearing about it for the first time, you're going to enjoy this journey through its twisted corridors and secret doors. So, sit back, grab a warm drink, maybe turn the lights down low to get into the mood, and watch this video till the end. Because once we open the door to Coraline's world, there's no turning back. Let's begin. The story of Coraline doesn't just unfold. It lures you in, just like it lures its title character, with a sense of wonder that slowly twists into dread. It starts innocently enough. Coraline Jones is a smart, adventurous girl recently relocated to a gloomy, rain-soaked countryside with her work-obsessed parents. They move into the Pink Palace apartments, a grand old house divided into strange little units, with even stranger neighbors. There's the eccentric duo Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, former actresses trapped in the golden glow of their past, and upstairs is Mr. Bobinski, a wildly energetic man claiming to be training a jumping mouse circus. Everyone seems to be living in their own world, and Coraline, hungry for attention and adventure, finds herself ignored, brushed aside, and utterly bored. That boredom becomes the gateway to something extraordinary when she discovers a small door in her living room wall, sealed shut and bricked over. But late one night, when the wind howls and the world feels just a bit off, Coraline returns to the door and finds the bricks gone. In their place is a glowing tunnel, a sort of shimmering throat that beckons her into a world that mirrors her own, but seems infinitely better. Her parents are there, but warmer, kinder, and actually interested in her. Her neighbors are cooler, her room is more magical, and there's even a talking cat and a living garden that blooms just for her. This world is tailored to every desire Coraline ever voiced out loud. But something is off. Everyone in this other world has buttons for eyes. And the moment Coraline is asked to sew buttons into her own eyes to stay forever, the mood shifts completely. The other mother, who once seemed like a dream come true, quickly reveals herself as something far more sinister, the beldam, an ancient creature who constructs these fantasy worlds to trap and consume children's souls. Coraline's refusal to give up her eyes marks the story's first major turning point. From here on, the film sheds its whimsical mask and plunges headfirst into psychological horror. The narrative doesn't play with time or nonlinear storytelling, but it masterfully plays with perception. What's real? What's illusion? What is love when it's too perfect? These questions are baked into the structure of Coraline's journey. Once her real parents are kidnapped and trapped in the other world, the stakes escalate. She's no longer a passive observer. She becomes the hero of her own story. She learns from the ghosts of previous victims, children who were also seduced, trapped, and drained of life by the beldam. Their eyes were taken, their souls lost. But they guide Coraline and ask for her help, planting the seed for the second act's emotional core: redemption, rescue, and resistance. Coraline challenges the beldam to a game: find the souls of the ghost children and her missing parents. It's a classic fairy tale trope, reminiscent of old folklore, the clever child up against a powerful, shape-shifting monster. But here, the game is layered with themes of bravery, self-discovery, and consequence. As Coraline explores the decaying other world, every corner she turns is darker, more broken, more grotesque. The world falls apart the closer she gets to the truth. The once charming neighbors morph into monstrous parodies of themselves, and the beldam herself transforms from a loving matron into a skeletal, spidery creature with needles for fingers and a hunger that's been centuries in the making. The emotional impact is intense. Coraline doesn't win because she's stronger. She wins because she's smart, brave, and willing to face fear head-on. She tricks the beldam, rescues the children's souls, and confronts her deepest fear: losing her real parents. By the end, the girl who began the story as bored and neglected has matured. She understands the messy, flawed love of her real world is far more valuable than the polished perfection of a fantasy. She returns home changed, not just relieved to be safe, but more grateful, more aware, and more grounded. Even the final act doesn't let the tension go easily. The beldam's hand, severed but still alive, crawls its way back to Coraline's world, desperate to drag her back. And even that final confrontation echoes the core of the story. Monsters don't always disappear when you say no. Sometimes you have to bury them with your own hands. Coraline's narrative structure may seem traditional on the surface: introduction, rising tension, climax, resolution, but its use of metaphor, layered symbolism, and dual realities make it anything but ordinary. It's a fairy tale wrapped in horror, a coming-of-age story steeped in Gothic imagery. It keeps you leaning forward, wondering what's real and what's a trap. The pacing, the slow unraveling of the dream, and the rising threat lurking behind every kindness, all of it crafts a story that sticks in your mind like a warning whispered in the dark. It's not just about a little girl escaping a witch. It's about growing up, seeing past illusions, and choosing reality, no matter how imperfect it may be. The character development in Coraline is anything but surface level. It's a carefully layered experience where each personality, from the protagonist to the minor side characters, serves a deeper purpose in Coraline's journey. These characters don't just exist as background color. They are fundamental mirrors, contrasts, and catalysts for transformation. The film may be built on stop-motion animation, but the emotional arcs move with the kind of weight and nuance you'd expect from the most grounded live-action drama. Let's begin with Coraline Jones herself, the fiery core of the story. She isn't a cookie-cutter protagonist. She's not sweet, soft-spoken, or even consistently likable, which is exactly what makes her real. She starts the film restless, frustrated, and hungry for stimulation. She doesn't just want love from her parents, she wants attention, engagement, excitement. And when she doesn't get it, she doesn't shrink back in quiet sadness. She rebels. She explores, she challenges, she pushes boundaries. But there's something deeper at play. Coraline is in that awkward transition between childhood and early adolescence, where imagination is still alive, but the world is beginning to disappoint. Her journey through the film is about learning that love and satisfaction don't always come in the form of instant gratification or fantasy. Her arc is one of earned maturity, not forced responsibility. In the other world, Coraline is immediately validated. Her other mother cooks feasts, showers her with attention, and creates a magical reality where everything seems tailored to her happiness. But what Coraline soon begins to understand is that this kind of love, the performative, overly perfect, dangerously indulgent kind, is hollow and controlling. Her refusal to have buttons sewn into her eyes is a moment of symbolic awakening. It's not just about the horror of the act itself. It's about Coraline choosing discomfort and imperfection over blind comfort. She realizes she doesn't want a mother who simply gives her everything she asks for. She wants one who loves her for who she is and who she can trust. Her real parents, Mel and Charlie, are easy to criticize in the beginning. They're distracted, tired, and constantly brushing Coraline off. But the genius of their character development is how it exists not through direct change, but through Coraline's changing perception. They don't become wildly different people by the end. They're still a bit distracted and still a bit tired. What shifts is Coraline's understanding of them. Through her terrifying experience with the beldam, she learns that her real parents' love might be quiet, but it's real. They don't bake magical cakes or build flower gardens in her image, but they care in their own imperfect human way. Coraline comes to value their mundane world because it's hers. It's honest, grounded, and safe in a way the button-eyed illusion never was. Then we have the beldam, the other mother, who is arguably one of the most chilling antagonists in modern animation. Her character is not just evil for the sake of plot. She's a layered figure of obsession, manipulation, and hunger. Her form changes as Coraline's resistance grows, starting as a doting housewife and ending as a needle-fingered, skeletal spider, visually representing the way temptation often disguises itself as kindness. What's brilliant about the beldam's character is that she doesn't just represent a monster. She represents the danger of wish fulfillment. Her love isn't unconditional, it's transactional. You get what you want as long as you surrender control. And that's what makes her terrifying. She isn't chasing Coraline because she wants a daughter. She wants a doll, a quiet, submissive soul she can control and consume. Her manipulation deepens as Coraline asserts independence, making her not just a villain but a metaphor for destructive control disguised as affection. YB Lovat, Coraline's neighbor and reluctant companion, is another character who undergoes subtle but meaningful development. In the real world, Coraline finds him annoying. He talks too much, gets in her way, and is generally an awkward nuisance. But in the other world, the beldam gives her a version of YB who is silent and obedient, stripped of his voice. This is no accident. It shows how the beldam constructs her world to reflect Coraline's fleeting wishes. But the horror of this voiceless YB becomes clear as the story progresses. Coraline starts to see the value in the real YB's imperfections, the fact that he's unpredictable, messy, and real. When the real YB ends up helping her in the end, smashing the beldam's skeletal hand in the final act, he becomes more than a sidekick. He becomes a friend Coraline didn't know she needed, one who doesn't try to impress her or give her everything she asks for, but who stands by her when it really matters. The supporting characters, Mr. Bobinski, Miss Spink, and Miss Forcible, are delightfully odd in both worlds, but there's more to them than just comic relief. In the real world, they're eccentric and a little unhinged, clinging to past glories and living in dusty nostalgia. In the other world, they are transformed into larger-than-life caricatures of themselves, lavish performers, circus masters, theatrical divas, all designed to distract Coraline with spectacle. But even these exaggerated versions hint at something deeper, that there is always more beneath the surface of the people around us. Their real-world selves may seem ridiculous, but they hold hidden wisdom, foreshadowing Coraline's danger and even helping her along the way. These characters don't grow in the traditional sense, but they contribute to Coraline's growth by forcing her to reevaluate how she sees the world. Then there's the cat, the nameless, snarky, aloof feline that guides Coraline through her journey. He straddles both worlds, speaking only in the other one, and serving as a kind of mystical observer and reluctant ally. The cat is not affectionate, not loyal in the conventional sense, and certainly not tame. But he respects Coraline's intelligence and sees her potential. He doesn't hold her hand. He points out the dangers, offers the occasional cryptic insight, and lets her figure it out. The cat's arc isn't about change. It's about presence. He's the one figure who resists the beldam's influence entirely. His resistance becomes Coraline's inspiration. He represents independence, wit, and quiet strength, the qualities Coraline learns to embrace herself. In the end, Coraline gives us characters that feel like more than animated figures. They feel like fragments of ourselves, our doubts, our dreams, our conflicts. The story takes each character and places them inside a carefully woven web of reality and illusion, fear and strength, love and control. Their arcs don't follow flashy, dramatic transformations, but emotional, psychological, and perceptual shifts that stay with you long after the film ends. It's not just Coraline who changes. It's the way she sees the world, the way she understands people, and the way we, as the audience, begin to recognize the layers beneath every seemingly simple character. That's the brilliance of the film. It tricks you into thinking it's just a spooky adventure, and by the time the final frame closes, you've witnessed a complete emotional metamorphosis built on some of the most thoughtful character development in modern cinema. The performances in Coraline are the secret heartbeat of the film, the invisible force that turns stop-motion puppets into living, breathing characters with depth, emotion, and humanity. While the film's visuals are undeniably captivating, it's the voice work behind these animated figures that gives them soul. This isn't a story told through flashy delivery or exaggerated acting. It's one where every line is laced with personality, emotion, and subtext. The actors don't just read their lines, they embody their characters. They craft entire inner lives with nothing more than tone, timing, and breath. At the very center is Dakota Fanning, who voices Coraline Jones. Fanning was just a teenager herself when she recorded the part, but her performance captures that awkward, sharp-edged moment between childhood and adolescence with stunning authenticity. She doesn't sound like she's playing a character. She is Coraline. Her voice is bold and curious, with a slight bite of impatience that perfectly reflects Coraline's restlessness. She's annoyed with her parents, bored with her surroundings, and deeply unimpressed with the strange adults around her. But there's also vulnerability beneath her sarcasm. In moments of fear or loneliness, Fanning's voice softens, not dramatically, not melodramatically, but just enough to let you feel Coraline's isolation. She makes Coraline a full person, flawed, brave, impulsive, and fiercely independent. That balance between confidence and fragility, stubbornness and heart, is incredibly difficult to pull off, especially in animation. But Fanning delivers it with total control. Then comes Teri Hatcher, who pulls double duty as both Mel Jones, Coraline's distracted, overworked real mom, and the other mother, or beldam, who is anything but human. This dual performance is, frankly, masterful. As Mel, Hatcher speaks with a clipped, tired edge, giving off the impression of someone juggling too many things at once and barely keeping it together. Her love is buried under exhaustion. She's not warm, but she's not cold either. She's just trying to keep the wheels turning. Then, as the other mother, Hatcher flips into something completely different. At first, her voice becomes syrupy sweet, almost too sweet, like a spoonful of sugar laced with poison. She speaks slowly, deliberately, wrapping Coraline in comfort. But as the illusion starts to crack, Hatcher begins peeling away that sugary coating, revealing something sharp and unnatural underneath. Her voice drops in pitch, her words become clipped, and her tone turns icy. She doesn't need to shout to be terrifying. Her calmness is what makes her chilling. By the end, when the beldam has fully transformed into her skeletal spider form, Hatcher's voice is stripped of all warmth. It's the sound of a predator. This performance isn't just scary, it's psychologically unsettling because it mirrors how deception works in real life. The same voice that once comforted Coraline becomes the one that threatens to consume her. It's not just villainy. It's manipulation, and Hatcher nails it. Keith David, voicing the nameless Black Cat, brings a level of gravitas that anchors the entire film. His voice is smooth, confident, and dry, with just the right amount of sarcasm. He's the only character who can travel freely between the two worlds, and his performance carries that mystery. He doesn't speak often, but when he does, his voice commands attention. David delivers his lines with the wisdom of someone who's seen it all but refuses to explain everything. He's like a noir detective in feline form, cool, detached, and impossible not to listen to. His voice never tries to comfort Coraline directly. He challenges her, nudges her forward, and lets her earn her own victories. That restraint gives the character a quiet power. It's the kind of performance where even silence carries meaning. John Hodgman, another actor with dual roles, voices both Charlie Jones, Coraline's dad, and the other father. As Charlie, Hodgman sounds distracted, good-natured, and a bit nerdy. There's a warmth in his absent-mindedness, a softness that suggests he's not neglectful out of cruelty, but simply lost in his own head. In contrast, his portrayal of the other father is more animated, whimsical, and exaggerated. The other father is charming and musical, often trying too hard to impress. But Hodgman doesn't stop there. As the other father begins to unravel under the beldam's control, Hodgman subtly layers his voice with tension, unease, and fear. You start to hear the cracks. His laughter becomes nervous, his joy sounds forced, and his final pleas to Coraline are filled with heartbreaking urgency. He's not just a puppet. He's aware of his fate. And Hodgman's voice brings that tragedy to life in a way that's quietly devastating. Jennifer Saunders and Dawn French, as Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, are an absolutely delightful pairing. They bring an old married couple energy to their roles, constantly bickering but clearly inseparable. Their comic timing is razor-sharp, delivering their lines with theatrical flair and perfect rhythm. They play off each other effortlessly, infusing their characters with eccentricity and charm. But their performances aren't just for laughs. They also add depth. You get the sense that these two women have lived long, complex lives, filled with drama and dreams and disappointment. In the other world, they're transformed into absurd, over-the-top versions of their former glory, and Saunders and French shift their performances accordingly. They go big, they go ridiculous, but they never go flat. Even in their most exaggerated moments, their voices carry heart. There's always something human underneath the camp. Ian McShane, voicing Mr. Bobinski, is the definition of memorable. His thick, theatrical Russian accent is both hilarious and strangely endearing. McShane fully commits to the role, making Bobinski feel like a whirlwind of nervous energy and exaggerated pride. He takes what could have been a forgettable side character and injects him with such eccentric charisma that you find yourself fascinated by every word. Even when he's rambling nonsense, it feels intentional, like there's something he knows that Coraline doesn't. His performance helps make the Pink Palace feel like a living, breathing place full of secrets. What's remarkable across the board is how well this ensemble functions as a whole. None of the performances feel like they're clashing. Everyone is perfectly in tune with the tone and texture of the film, balancing the eerie with the heartfelt, the strange with the sincere. These actors don't just say their lines and move on. They perform with precision. They understand the emotional arc of the film and how their voice needs to reflect those changes without the help of facial expressions or physical gestures. They let their characters evolve through sound alone. And perhaps the most powerful part of these performances is how they reinforce the film's themes: identity, perception, control, and the messy, beautiful truth of real relationships. Each voice helps Coraline navigate her internal and external struggles, shaping the way the audience interprets each moment. The cast elevates the material, bringing a deep emotional undercurrent to a film that could have easily been just a spooky fairy tale. In a world built of felt, fabric, and thread, it's the voices behind the characters that make everything feel real. The performances in Coraline don't just support the story, they shape it. The direction of Coraline is what turns this eerie little tale into a masterclass in atmospheric storytelling. At the helm is Henry Selick, a filmmaker with an extraordinary eye for the strange and the surreal. He doesn't just guide the story, he sculpts it, frame by frame, with the patience of a craftsman and the imagination of a dreamer. This is not a film that simply unfolds. It invites you in, pulls you through its corridors of wonder and dread, and never lets you feel entirely safe. Selick builds a world where the tiniest detail has meaning, where mood is stitched into every corner, and where the tone shifts so subtly that you barely notice you've slipped from whimsy into horror until it's already wrapped around you. The mood in Coraline is a delicate balancing act between cozy and creepy. Selick creates two parallel worlds that mirror each other almost exactly, but not quite. And that not quite is everything. The real world is gray, cold, rainy, and grounded in messy imperfection. It's filled with cluttered desks, drab clothing, and characters who feel lived in and distracted. In contrast, the other world is vibrant, warm, and tailored to Coraline's desires. It glows with saturated colors, symmetrical framing, and impossibly precise details. But Selick infuses that world with just enough off-kilter elements, those shiny black buttons, that eerily perfect food, those grins that stretch just a little too wide, to signal that something's not right. It's not a hard switch. It's a slow burn. He doesn't shout the danger. He whispers it in the corners, lets it breathe in the silence, and allows the dread to sneak in naturally. Stylistically, the film is a treasure trove of inventive decisions that elevate every beat. Selick's use of stop-motion animation isn't just for novelty, it's the perfect medium for the story. There's something inherently uncanny about stop-motion. The characters move just a bit too stiffly, the textures are too tactile, and the world feels a little too handmade. Instead of hiding those quirks, Selick leans into them. They become part of the film's DNA. The effect is hypnotic. You're not watching an illusion of reality. You're watching a dreamscape crafted by human hands, and that makes the experience more intimate and more unsettling. Shot composition plays a huge role in the storytelling. In the real world, the framing is often wide and open, with characters small within the frame. Coraline feels alone, overlooked, and surrounded by space that does nothing for her. But when she enters the other world, the shots tighten. Everything becomes centered around her. The camera glides more smoothly, and the lighting becomes richer. It's seductive, and Selick wants the audience to feel that seduction right along with Coraline. He uses the camera like a storyteller whispering in your ear, changing its language as the story shifts. The pacing is another key weapon in Selick's toolkit. He doesn't rush. He takes his time establishing mood, building Coraline's world with quiet observations and small, deliberate choices. He lets us get to know her frustrations, her routines, and the peculiar rhythm of the Pink Palace before throwing us into anything magical. And when things start to change, he doesn't slam the gas. He lets the horror creep in like water seeping through cracks. That slow drip of unease is what makes the film so effective. When the other world finally reveals its true face, it's terrifying not because it's sudden, but because it's been slowly closing its grip the whole time. Selick also understands the emotional currents that run beneath the fantasy. He gives space to the silences, to the moments of quiet between characters, to the way Coraline reacts when no one is looking. These aren't just visual flourishes, they're emotional cues. He frames Coraline not as a sidekick to a magical adventure, but as the active force in her own story. Her perspective shapes every scene. We see through her eyes, feel through her fears, and understand the world as she discovers it. And then there's the way Selick stages transformation and tension. The gradual decay of the other world is a visual masterstroke. As Coraline starts to pull away from the illusion, the perfection peels back, revealing the mechanical, soulless machinery underneath. The once inviting sets twist into web-like geometry. The smooth characters begin to glitch and deform. Lighting becomes sharper, colder. Sound design thins out. And through all of this, Selick keeps a tight grip on the mood. He doesn't let it become chaos. He lets it simmer and simmer and simmer until it boils over in the final confrontation with the beldam. What's remarkable about Selick's direction is how unified his vision feels. Every element, animation, design, lighting, performance, pacing, feeds the same emotional arc. Nothing is arbitrary. Everything is deliberate. And it's all in service of Coraline's growth. He doesn't treat this as just a spooky children's tale or a dark fantasy. He treats it like a story about choice, perception, identity, and growing up. And he trusts the audience, young or old, to follow him into the shadows without needing every step explained. Selick doesn't draw attention to his directing style with flashy tricks or loud statements. Instead, he builds a world so consistent in its logic and so rich in its details that you feel fully transported. You believe in the rules. You believe in the stakes. And you believe in Coraline's journey. That kind of immersion doesn't come from special effects. It comes from vision, control, and a deep respect for the story being told. The direction in Coraline isn't just competent, it's essential. It guides tone like a conductor with a perfectly tuned orchestra, shifting from soft whimsy to sharp terror with seamless precision. It doesn't beg for attention. It earns it, moment by moment, frame by frame, until you realize you're not just watching a movie. You're exploring a world that feels both impossibly magical and uncomfortably real. The cinematography in Coraline is a silent narrator, quietly steering the emotional experience of the film with an elegance that often goes unnoticed on a first watch but leaves a deep impression by the end. This isn't your typical cinematography, captured by live-action cameras and lenses. Instead, it's an incredibly intricate ballet of stop-motion camera work, meticulously planned lighting, and calculated framing, all working together to bring the story to life with richness, tension, and eerie visual poetry. From the very first scenes, the lighting sets the tone. The real world is muted, filled with washed-out grays and pale blues. The skies are cloudy, the rooms dim, and the air seems heavy. This isn't accidental. It's deliberate visual storytelling. Coraline's world feels dull and lifeless because she feels ignored, unseen, stuck in a place that's unfamiliar and underwhelming. The way light falls in this world, often slanted, cold, and indirect, tells us everything we need to know about her isolation. The cinematography uses shadows to underscore how little warmth or emotional connection she has in this space. But then she opens a small, mysterious door in the wall, and everything changes. The transition to the other world is a visual explosion. Saturated colors return in full force, lighting becomes richer and warmer, and the entire environment glows with a golden hue. The cinematography makes you feel what Coraline feels, invited, enchanted, and deeply curious. The lighting in this world isn't just brighter, it's romanticized. It's theatrical and almost too perfect, with soft, even light illuminating every detail like it was designed just for her. It's dreamlike, but that's the trick. The light doesn't feel natural. It feels staged, like a spotlight on a stage meant to keep her gaze locked in. That becomes the cinematographer's sleight of hand, using beauty to set a trap. As Coraline begins to question the other world, the lighting slowly shifts again. It becomes more high contrast. Shadows get sharper. Darkness creeps into corners that were previously glowing. The once inviting warm light fades, replaced by harsher whites and icy blues. The camera lingers longer on small, unsettling details. The fabric of a face, the twitch of a puppet, the glint of metal in the beldam's eyes. The cinematography here isn't just creating horror, it's building dread. You feel it coming long before Coraline does, because the camera has already begun to turn the world against her. The camera angles themselves are a key storytelling tool. In Coraline's real world, the shots are often wide, static, and off-center. She's placed low in the frame, dwarfed by furniture, by ceilings, by the vastness of a house that doesn't quite feel like home. It emphasizes her smallness, her boredom, her desire to escape. But in the other world, the camera treats her like a star. She's framed symmetrically, centered, often shown from below to give her presence and importance. This trick makes the other world feel not just magical, but personal, like it was made just for her. And that's exactly what the beldam wants her to believe. As the illusion begins to crack, the cinematography gets more claustrophobic. the camera moves closer, tighter. Coraline is often filmed from skewed angles, as if the world is literally tilting around her. The depth of field becomes shallower, backgrounds blur, and focus locks sharply onto her face, isolating her visually from the environment that's turning hostile. These choices aren't flashy, but they're incredibly effective at creating tension. You start to feel the space closing in around her. And then there are the standout moments, sequences that are visually unforgettable. One of the most striking is the garden scene in The Other World, where the flowers bloom in Coraline's image. The camera swoops in slow, graceful arcs, capturing the blooming spectacle from wide aerial views, then dropping down into her delighted face as flowers bloom and creatures crawl. It feels like a fairy tale dream caught on film. But compare that to the moment later in the film when the other father sits slumped at his piano, forced to sing under the beldam's control. The lighting is eerie and low. The camera moves slowly, almost fearfully, and the scene is composed like a prison, a perfect contrast to the earlier freedom. You're not just watching his performance. You're watching his suffering. Another powerful use of framing happens in the corridor that connects the two worlds. It's long, rounded, and glows with a soft, alien blue. It's filmed almost like a birth canal, a visual metaphor for rebirth, for transformation. The shots within this tunnel are symmetrical and centered, drawing the eye inward and making the journey between worlds feel hypnotic, surreal, and irreversible. Later, when Coraline returns through the tunnel under duress, the light is dimmed and flickering, and the camera pushes closer to her back. It's no longer a whimsical passage, it's a descent into danger. The final confrontation with the beldam is a visual crescendo. The world around her strips down to bare geometry, cold colors, and spiderweb structures. The lighting here is harsh, casting angular shadows that mimic the beldam's bone-thin form. The cinematography makes the world feel brittle, as if it could shatter at any second, because it could. The framing tightens, the camera movements quicken, and every shot becomes more frantic. When Coraline escapes, the shift is immediate. The lighting returns to a softer, more grounded feel, and the angles widen again. The relief isn't just in the story, it's in the very construction of the image. Throughout the film, the cinematography never just shows, it always tells. Every shot has purpose. Every lighting choice serves a mood. Every frame helps tell you who Coraline is, how she feels, and what she's up against. It guides your emotions with precision, using color, space, and movement to whisper that this world, while beautiful, is not what it seems. This is cinematography that doesn't scream for attention, but that seeps into your skin and stays with you long after the film ends. It crafts tension without needing jump scares. It builds wonder without relying on spectacle. And it helps transform Coraline from a clever story into a rich, visual experience, one where every shadow means something, and every flicker of light is a sign that something magical or monstrous is about to happen. The editing and pacing of Coraline operate with the precision of a well-wound clock, steady, deliberate, and absolutely essential to the atmosphere of the film. This is a story that doesn't race to deliver its thrills or rush its mystery. Instead, it draws you in with a slow drip of intrigue, letting tension build like water rising in a glass, one drop at a time. And that's exactly where the magic lies. The editing never wastes a moment, but it also never feels impatient. It's a perfect match for a story where discovery, fear, and wonder all live side by side. From the very first frames, the film signals its tempo. The opening sequence, watching the creation of a Coraline doll by needle and thread, moves with an eerie stillness. It's wordless, methodical, unsettling. It sets the mood with long pauses and mechanical sound design, and the editing doesn't rush to get you to the next thing. That's intentional. The editors, led by Christopher Murray and Ronald Sanders, understand that this isn't just a spooky tale, it's a mood piece. Every cut needs to honor the mood. So instead of quick transitions or fast montages, you get carefully considered pacing that lets you feel each location, absorb each odd character, and live in Coraline's shoes. As Coraline explores the real world, the editing leans toward longer takes and slower rhythms. This mirrors her emotional state, bored, restless, waiting for something more. Conversations are allowed to breathe. The awkward pauses between her and her distracted parents aren't cut away. They're left in to highlight the emotional distance. The editing here builds a kind of soft tension, not the kind that scares you, but the kind that makes you quietly uncomfortable, like something's missing. Then she finds the small door, and the film's rhythm begins to shift. The cuts become slightly tighter, the transitions smoother. The pace picks up just enough to match Coraline's rising curiosity. When she enters the other world, the editing becomes subtly more fluid. Scenes begin to link with a kind of dreamy momentum. Sequences glide from one moment to the next with visual echoes and match cuts that enhance the surrealism. But here's where the editing becomes truly clever. It mimics Coraline's perception. At first, her visits to the other world are like Wonderland tours, with longer, more indulgent scenes. But as danger creeps in, the cuts begin to change. Moments start to overlap. Transitions become less gentle. The pacing tightens like a noose. One of the most brilliant aspects of the editing is how it manages the balance between calm and chaos. The film doesn't rush toward its climax. Instead, it lets the stakes rise in waves. Just when you think the other world might be a little too perfect, something small shifts, a character lingers too long, a voice changes tone, and the edit lets it hang just a second longer than expected. That hesitation becomes dread. That slowness makes the horror more effective. And when things do get intense, when Coraline is on the run from the beldam or racing against time to escape, the pacing finally accelerates, but never sloppily. The tension feels earned. The rhythm builds naturally, escalating into sharp, urgent edits that mirror Coraline's rising fear. The transitions between the real world and the other world are another standout. Instead of relying on flashy effects, the film often uses physical spaces, the small door, the tunnel, to create seamless transitions. These passages are always edited with care, letting you feel the shift in tone, in texture, in light. The pace slows as Coraline crawls through the passage, creating a moment of breath between realities. These breaks are crucial. They give the audience time to reset, to process the change, to anticipate what's coming next. In scenes of emotional weight, like when Coraline discovers the ghost children or confronts the beldam, the editing becomes more intimate. Cuts draw closer to her face. Reactions are held longer. The rhythm slows, not to drag, but to let the gravity of the moment settle. You're not just watching Coraline act, you're sitting with her as the weight of the world begins to press down. Even the film's quieter moments, like Coraline walking through the garden or exploring the Pink Palace, are paced with intention. Nothing feels like filler. The editing knows when to linger and when to move. That's a subtle art. Too much lingering, and you lose momentum. Too much movement, and you lose mood. But Coraline finds the sweet spot, where every edit either nudges the story forward or deepens the emotional texture. The climax, in particular, is a masterclass in rhythmic control. The editing quickens, the cuts come faster, the stakes get higher, but clarity is never sacrificed. You always know where Coraline is, what she's doing, and what she's risking. That's not easy in a film filled with twisting tunnels, collapsing rooms, and shifting perspectives. The editors choreograph the action so it feels intense, but never overwhelming. And then, just as quickly, the film breathes again. The pacing slows in the final scenes, allowing for resolution. Not just plot resolution, but emotional resolution. The editing here is gentle, patient, respectful of what Coraline has endured. It doesn't rush her transformation. It lets us watch her settle back into her home, no longer restless, but rooted. That slow return to stillness is just as powerful as any action sequence. The real brilliance of Coraline's editing is that it's never showy. It doesn't scream for attention. It simply works, quietly guiding your emotions, shaping your perceptions, and making sure you feel the right things at the right time. It controls tension with silence just as well as with speed. It knows when to hold and when to release. It's not about flashy transitions or rapid-fire cuts. It's about rhythm, mood, and emotional honesty. And in Coraline, That rhythm turns a haunting little fairy tale into a deeply immersive experience that sticks with you long after the final frame. The soundtrack and score of Coraline are like the invisible threads sewn into every frame, never calling attention to themselves, yet absolutely vital in holding the entire atmosphere together. Composed by Bruno Cathala, the music in this film doesn't behave like most traditional movie scores. It doesn't swell dramatically or lead you by the hand through every emotional beat. Instead, it lurks, whispers, and drifts, creeping under the surface like a second voice in the story, sometimes playful, sometimes haunting, always strange. What makes this score stand out immediately is its sheer originality. It doesn't rely on orchestral cliches or familiar melodic tropes. It uses unusual instruments, childlike choirs, and strange harmonics to craft something that feels completely otherworldly. From the very first notes, the music pulls you into a dream state. Delicate bells, muted strings, choral murmurs in gibberish languages. It feels ancient and mysterious, like a lullaby hummed in a forgotten tongue. The beauty of it is that you can't quite pin it down. You're never sure if the music is comforting or unsettling, and that ambiguity mirrors the entire story. There's a recurring motif throughout Coraline that follows her journey between worlds. Every time she steps into the other world, the score becomes more layered, more melodic, more enchanting. The voices of the children's choir return, almost angelic, drifting alongside warm instrumentation. It's music that feels like a reward, a perfect match for the illusion of a better life. But there's always an undertone beneath the sweetness, a discordant note, a shadow in the harmony. The closer Coraline gets to danger, the more that warm music begins to curdle. Those same motifs return, but they twist. Harmonies clash. The choir voices stretch just a little too high or fall slightly offbeat. The score becomes a character in itself, seducing Coraline with sweetness, then revealing its darker edge. Silence is used just as effectively as sound. There are moments in Coraline where the music drops away completely, and those silences aren't just empty, they're heavy. In scenes where Coraline first senses that something is wrong, the absence of music becomes oppressive. You're left with only ambient sounds, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of fabric, the subtle mechanical click of something moving where it shouldn't. The silence makes your ears stretch. It builds tension in a way no loud score ever could. It invites you to listen more closely, to feel more deeply. When the music does return, it hits with even more impact. In the more intense or emotionally charged moments, like Coraline's confrontation with the ghost children, or her final escape from the beldam, the score doesn't explode into chaotic noise. It tightens. It sharpens. Cathala pulls in tight, using staccato strings, eerie whispers, and layered rhythms that almost feel like a heartbeat growing louder. It's precise and calculated. There's a sense that every sound is placed exactly where it needs to be to deepen the suspense. Nothing is accidental. The pacing of the music matches the editing and action perfectly, so the viewer is guided emotionally without being pushed. What's especially memorable is how the music enhances not just fear, but emotion. There are tracks that are genuinely beautiful, almost sorrowful. These are the quiet themes that play in the background of Coraline's lonelier moments, when she's trying to connect with her distant parents, or reflecting on her growing awareness that this fantasy world may be too good to be true. In these scenes, the music doesn't tell you how to feel, it reflects what Coraline is feeling. The tone is often melancholic, not dramatic, giving the film a mature emotional core. You feel her longing. You feel her regret. And it's all thanks to the restraint and emotional intelligence in the composition. One particularly striking musical moment comes when Coraline is first shown the wonders of the Otherworld's theater. As Miss Spink and Miss Forcible perform, the music mimics the exaggerated drama of their stage act, grand, sweeping, flamboyant. But underneath that spectacle, there's still something subtly off-kilter. It's playful, but hollow. It's entertaining, but exaggerated. It's music that wants to distract Coraline, just as the beldam does, and it does it well. There's also an impressive unity between the film's sound design and score. The music doesn't feel layered on top of the story. It feels embedded within it. In several scenes, it's hard to tell where the music ends and the environment begins. A wind chime, a creaking door, a drip of water. These sounds blend so seamlessly with the score that they become part of the musical texture. It creates a kind of immersive audio landscape that pulls you deeper into Coraline's world without ever demanding attention. Even the credits' music has its own distinct tone. Instead of a bombastic finale, the closing theme is eerie, echoing, and strange, like a lullaby from another dimension. It leaves you with a sense of wonder and maybe a lingering chill. It doesn't try to resolve every emotional thread. It lets you sit with the questions, the curiosity, and the unease that the film has spent the last 90 minutes carefully building. The music of Coraline is never just background noise. It's woven into the very fabric of the film's identity. It haunts. It enchants. It unsettles. And like the buttons stitched onto the other mother's face, it's both beautiful and unnatural, just familiar enough to seem safe, and just strange enough to keep you on edge. It doesn't overpower the story. It protects it like a hidden thread stitching everything together. The score whispers secrets the characters won't say, echoes fears they won't admit, and paints every scene with emotional depth that makes the film unforgettable. Coraline might look like a whimsical stop-motion fantasy about a brave little girl and a magical world behind a tiny door, but underneath its stylized charm and button-eyed horrors, it's pulsing with layered, deeply resonant themes that speak to both children and adults in different ways. This isn't just a story about escaping boredom or defeating a villain. It's a reflection on identity, family, independence, and the seductive danger of perfection. At its core, the film explores the universal longing for attention, recognition, and belonging. Coraline is a child who feels ignored by her parents, overlooked in her new home, and misunderstood by everyone around her. Her real world is dull, gray, and emotionally disconnected. Her parents aren't cruel, but they're preoccupied, tired, and practical to a fault. So when she discovers the other world, where everything is vibrant, personalized, and seemingly designed to make her feel important, it's irresistible. And that's where the story's most powerful theme kicks in. The idea that too much of what you want can be just as dangerous as too little. The other world is built on wish fulfillment, but not in a comforting way. It's engineered to reflect Coraline's desires back at her like a mirror, her favorite food, magical gardens in her image, parents who shower her with attention. But it's not real. It's performative. The message here is subtle but strong. Reality might be messy, imperfect, and full of flaws, but it's real. And real love isn't about constant praise or carefully crafted experiences. It's about presence, even in the ordinary. The beldam offers Coraline everything she wants on the surface, but only to lure her into surrendering what makes her human, her soul, her free will, her ability to choose. The metaphor is clear. Comfort without choice is control. That brings us to another major theme, control versus autonomy star. The beldam's entire tactic is built around control disguised as affection. She flatters, rewards, and dotes on Coraline until she agrees to stay forever, but only if she lets go of herself, literally and symbolically, by allowing buttons to be sewn over her eyes. That image, replacing one's eyes, the gateway to perception and understanding, with blank, artificial symbols of ownership is terrifying because it speaks to a much deeper fear. Losing your ability to see for yourself. Losing your voice, your independence, your truth. Coraline's journey becomes about reclaiming agency in a world that wants to mold her into something obedient and silent. The film also speaks volumes about courage, not as the absence of fear, but as action in the face of it. Coraline is not a superhero. She's a child. She's scared. But she makes hard choices, sacrifices her comfort, and takes responsibility for her actions. She could have ignored the danger, could have shut the door forever and stayed safe, but she doesn't. She returns to rescue others, confront her fears, and fix the damage. The idea that courage is quiet, personal, and often uncomfortable is baked into every choice she makes. It's not just a theme, it's a challenge to the audience. Would you be as brave? There's also a strong undercurrent of growing up running through the film. Coraline's journey is a coming-of-age tale in disguise. She starts the story wanting everything her way: food, attention, adventure. But by the end, she's learned to appreciate the imperfections of the people around her. She begins to understand that real relationships require patience, empathy, and compromise. Her parents didn't change, but she did. That emotional maturity, earning the insight that love isn't always loud or obvious, is one of the most meaningful takeaways in the entire film. Another layer comes in the form of illusion versus reality. The other world is full of spectacle, magic, colors, singing mice, talking animals. But every part of it is manufactured. Coraline slowly learns that reality, even when it's gray and hard and boring, holds more value because it's rooted in truth. This is a film that warns against the temptation of escapism when it comes at the cost of honesty. That lesson hits especially hard for anyone who has ever dreamed of a better place, only to find out that shortcuts often come with strings attached. And then there's the theme of identity. Coraline is constantly told who she should be, how she should behave, what she should accept. But throughout the story, she pushes back. She questions authority, challenges comfort, and ultimately defines herself by her choices, not by her environment. Her identity isn't something handed to her, it's something she has to fight for. That resonates on a deep level, especially for younger viewers beginning to shape their own sense of self, and for older viewers who remember what it felt like to be that age and want to be seen for who they really were. Even the supporting characters add thematic depth. The ghost children trapped by the beldam represent what happens when you give in to temptation without understanding the cost. The cat, ever watchful and cryptic, serves as a voice of caution and independence. He follows no one, owes nothing, but guides Coraline when she proves herself worthy. He's not a helper. He's a mirror of Coraline's growing self-reliance. Even the eccentric neighbors, Miss Spink, Miss Forcible, and Mr. Bobinski, contribute to the message. Reality might be weird and frustrating, but it's layered with texture and unpredictability, unlike the hollow mimicry of the other world. Ultimately, Coraline explores the beauty of imperfection. Real life isn't symmetrical or scripted. It's awkward, sometimes boring, sometimes disappointing, but it's yours. The film doesn't scold viewers for wanting more. It understands that craving comfort and attention is human. But it challenges you to question where that desire comes from and what you're willing to sacrifice to satisfy it. The film's message lingers because it doesn't offer easy answers. It respects its audience enough to let the questions echo long after the credits roll. This is storytelling that whispers rather than shouts, that trusts you to notice the threads woven between each scene. It's not just a spooky adventure, it's a thoughtful, layered exploration of what it means to grow up, to choose truth over fantasy, and to find strength in being yourself, even when the world tries to sell you something shinier. In Coraline, visual effects aren't just there to dazzle. They're integral to the soul of the story, and they work in a way that's unlike almost any other animated film. What sets this movie apart is that most of its effects are not digital at all. This is a stop-motion film, which means nearly everything you see on screen, every twitch of a character's eyebrow, every flickering candle, every shifting shadow, was built, lit, and filmed by hand. That tactile, crafted approach gives Coraline a texture and visual weight that CGI-heavy films simply can't replicate. But even within that handcrafted world, digital effects are sprinkled in with remarkable precision, not to dominate the visuals, but to support and enrich them. The practical effects are a marvel of patience and creativity. Miniature sets were constructed down to the tiniest details, with functioning drawers, real fabric costumes, and moving parts that had to be adjusted frame by frame. The movement of characters is subtly imperfect in a way that feels human, not robotic. You can see the fabric crease, the dust settle, the stitching on clothes shift slightly as the characters move. That imperfection is what makes the world feel alive. When Coraline walks through a kitchen or explores a spooky hallway, you don't feel like you're looking at a render. You feel like you could reach out and touch the walls. That sense of physicality grounds the fantastical elements in reality. Now, where CGI does come in, it's used sparingly but effectively. It's most present in enhancements, things like adding subtle effects to smoke, fire, fog, magical dust, and hair movement. These elements are nearly invisible in their digital origins because they are designed to blend into the handmade aesthetic, not stand out. CGI isn't used to create whole characters or replace sets. It's there to add atmosphere, to make transitions smoother, or to manipulate background elements that would be too time-consuming or impractical to animate manually. You might not even realize when digital touches are happening because they're woven so seamlessly into the fabric of the stop-motion world. One of the most impressive things about the visual effects in Coraline is how they handle transformation. The shifting of the other world from a dream to a nightmare is filled with visual changes that are both subtle and horrifying. At first, everything is symmetrical, rich with saturated colors and soft lighting. As Coraline begins to see through the illusion, the colors desaturate, shadows deepen, and the world begins to peel. Visual effects are used here not for spectacle, but to reinforce psychological unease. Walls crack unnaturally. Characters become distorted. The once inviting garden starts to rot and fray. These transformations are handled with a mixture of physical puppetry and post-production effects, often using replacement parts or mechanical rigs layered with digital touches to complete the illusion. One unforgettable use of visual transformation is the beldam herself. Her evolution from warm, nurturing other mother to skeletal spider monster is done in stages, with each version becoming more grotesque and less human. The progression is so smooth that you almost don't notice it happening at first. That's the power of the visual effects here. They're patient, calculated, and used in service of storytelling. The final form of the beldam, with her needle-thin limbs and cracked ceramic skin, is animated with practical models, but enhanced digitally to give her that impossible fluidity and menace. She doesn't just look scary. She moves in a way that makes your spine tighten. Another incredible example of visual effects blending with practical magic is the corridor that connects Coraline's world with the other world. It looks like a living tunnel, pulsating with an eerie blue glow, stretching endlessly in stop-motion fluidity. It's an optical trick, made using physical models, clever lighting, and camera movement, then digitally extended to feel deeper, more surreal. The result is one of the most iconic visuals in the film. It doesn't rely on over-the-top graphics. It relies on illusion, technique, and emotional tone. The use of effects also plays into the film's key themes. In the real world, textures are rougher, lighting is flatter, and movement is more sluggish. Everything feels grounded, and even a little unpleasant. The other world is slick, smooth, and idealized, but only on the surface. The more Coraline digs into it, the more the visual perfection begins to crack. This contrast is beautifully expressed through visual effects, practical when life is real, digital and uncanny when reality is a lie. Even the tiny details like how the food looks in both worlds show this balance. The real food looks limp and cold. The food in the other world practically glows, but almost in a plastic, artificial way. There are also incredible flourishes hidden throughout the film that combine the best of both practical and digital. Look at the mice in Mr. Bobinsky's circus. They perform synchronized routines, forming complex shapes and patterns. Each mouse puppet was stop-motion animated, but many of the tiny particle effects, like glitters and trails, were added digitally to enhance their magic. It's a fine-tuned blend where you never feel pulled out of a scene because the handmade quality is always at the center. The genius of Coraline's visual effects lies in their restraint and intent. They're not here to show off. They're here to deepen the illusion, to sharpen the mood, and to hide in plain sight. Every enhancement, every transformation, every surreal moment is designed to serve character, story, and atmosphere. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is overused. It's a masterclass in blending the old-world craft of stop-motion with modern digital tools in a way that honors both. This isn't a film that overwhelms the senses. It seduces them. The effects don't scream. They whisper, twist, distort, and slowly take hold. And by the time you notice how much has changed, you're already in too deep. That's the power of visual storytelling done with purpose, and Coraline uses every trick in the book. manual and digital, to cast its spell with astonishing precision. The set design and locations in Coraline aren't just backdrops. They are living, breathing extensions of the story's emotions, themes, and secrets. Crafted entirely by hand through stop-motion animation, every room, hallway, garden, and even crack in the wall has intention behind it. These aren't passive environments. They act alongside the characters. They evolve with the story. They mirror Coraline's journey, and in some cases, betray her trust. Each location is more than a setting. It's a mood, a metaphor, and in some cases, a monster in disguise. Start with the Pink Palace, the primary setting of the film. This creaky, old Victorian house is a character all on its own. The real-world version of the house is painted in faded pastels, surrounded by gloomy trees and drenched in an almost permanently gray sky. Inside, rooms are sparse. The walls are a little cracked, the carpets are slightly threadbare. It's just believable enough to feel lived in, but it leans ever so slightly into the uncanny. That subtle oddness helps build an early tension, like the house is more going on than it wants to admit. You can practically smell the dust and old wood. The design doesn't scream horror, it just whispers that something isn't quite right. Then, of course, there's the other Pink Palace, a glowing, candy-colored twin of the original, drenched in charm and whimsy. The rooms are filled with everything Coraline ever wanted. The living room is warm and full of life. The kitchen is bright, clean, and always smells like something baking. Even her bedroom is reimagined with vibrant colors, moving toys, and dancing lights. It's like someone reached into her dreams and built them into reality. But look closer, and it's almost too perfect. The symmetry is unnerving. The lighting is seductive. And the colors don't comfort, they trap. The way the other world uses set design to win Coraline over is brilliant. It's not just offering her luxury. It's offering her belonging. It wants her to feel at home before it locks the door. The tunnel that connects the two worlds is a location that deserves special mention. It's a physical and symbolic portal, and its design reflects that perfectly. At first, it's soft and glowing, almost like a magical birth canal, round, warm, and full of promise. But as the story progresses and the other world reveals its true nature, the tunnel becomes darker, colder, and more jagged. It physically changes based on the emotional stakes, which makes it a terrifyingly dynamic environment. Crawling through it isn't just a transition, it's a test of courage. The garden in the other world is one of the most stunning visual locations in the film. It blooms into the shape of Coraline's face, bursting with impossibly bright colors, oversized flowers, and fantastical creatures. It's designed like a surreal amusement park, but also like a trap that flatters its prey. It's a masterstroke in production design. Beautiful, dreamlike, and just artificial enough to make you wonder how deep the illusion goes. Later, when the garden begins to decay, it loses that symmetry and saturation, showing the fragility of the fantasy. That shift alone carries more emotional weight than some entire character arcs in other films. Even the rooms of the neighbors reflect Coraline's shifting perceptions. Mr. Bobinsky's apartment is full of circus clutter, deep shadows, and Russian eccentricity. It feels slightly off, like a storage room that doubles as a performance stage. The twins, Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, live surrounded by piles of faded grandeur, furniture, costumes, trophies from their youth. Their apartment is like a museum of forgotten fame, and its chaotic layout reflects their muddled grasp on the present. These rooms are crafted with such precision that you learn about the characters just by looking at what they live with. The visual contrasts between the real and otherworld versions of these apartments are subtle but important. In the other world, Bobinsky becomes a ringmaster, his apartment a glowing big-top tent of perfection. Spink and Forcible transform their apartment into a glamorous theater where they perform eternal acts of self-congratulation. It's dazzling, yes, but also claustrophobic. Each set is like a stage, and Coraline is always the audience, or the target. Props play an equally vital role. Coraline's little stone with a hole in the middle. The doll that looks like her. The key to the small door. Each object is loaded with narrative importance and visual personality. These aren't generic items. They're textured, worn, and distinctly handmade. The props often reflect emotional beats. Her yellow raincoat and boots give her a visual identity as someone curious and brave. The doll is adorable at first, then increasingly sinister. The set designers knew that every item in the frame had to serve both function and feeling, and the result is a film where even background details whisper story hints. One of the boldest moves in set design happens toward the climax. As the other world collapses, so do its locations. Rooms become stripped down to geometric frames. Furniture vanishes. Walls decay. The entire environment begins to feel like a stage being dismantled piece by piece until the truth is bare. This world was never real. It was a performance. That unraveling is not only visually spectacular but emotionally powerful, and it's entirely executed through changes in the sets. The balance between creepy and cozy, magical and menacing is a delicate one, and Coraline achieves it through a stunning commitment to visual storytelling. Every room, every corner, every single object feels like it was built with a narrative purpose. The Pink Palace isn't just where the story happens. It is the story, evolving as Coraline does, changing shape to reflect her fears, desires, and decisions. The production design doesn't just support the tale. It deepens it, traps you in it, and ultimately guides you out when it's time to return to reality. The dialogue and script in Coraline carry a quiet kind of brilliance. It's not flashy. It doesn't rely on long monologues or rapid-fire jokes. Instead, it whispers truths, drops eerie clues, and builds a slow, satisfying rhythm that stays in your head long after the story ends. Henry Selick, who adapted Neil Gaiman's novella into the screenplay, strikes a delicate balance between childlike curiosity and mature emotional resonance. The words are chosen with precision. Every line feels like it belongs, whether it's laced with sarcasm, soaked in tension, or filled with quiet dread. Coraline herself is written with a sharpness that defines her. She's not a perfect heroine. She's impatient, sarcastic, headstrong, and stubborn, but that's what makes her real. Her dialogue reflects a child who's growing up a little too fast, craving attention in a world that feels indifferent. From her very first interactions with her parents, we hear that tension. "I almost fell down a well yesterday, Mom," she says, trying to break through the fog of their adult distractions. That line is funny, dramatic, and painfully real. It's not just about the well, it's a cry for someone to notice her. The script is full of lines that do exactly what they need to do, without overstating anything. When Coraline first meets Wybie, their exchanges are awkward, clipped, and slightly confrontational, which perfectly mirrors how kids often feel about forced friendships. Their banter has an unpolished charm to it. "You're not my friend. You're just a stalker?" Coraline barks, and it's both hilarious and brutal in its honesty. The dialogue never sounds like it's trying too hard to be kid-friendly. It trusts its audience to follow along without being talked down to. Then there's the otherworld dialogue, which flips everything just slightly. It sounds sweet on the surface, but there's a strange stiffness under it. The other mother, for example, speaks in warm tones and gentle phrases, always offering Coraline comfort, but there's a chilling lack of real emotion. Her compliments feel rehearsed. Her kindness too polished. When she says, "You could stay here forever if you want to," it should be comforting, but it lands with a sinister weight. That's the genius of the script. It turns something simple into something menacing with just the right amount of subtlety. Even the way the ghost children speak carries a haunting, lyrical sadness. Their dialogue is sparse and poetic, like whispers from another time. "She spied on our lives through the little doll's eyes." That line is a standout, not just for the imagery, but for the rhythm of it. It sounds like a riddle, a nursery rhyme gone wrong. The script often plays with that tone, leaning into the fairy tale structure, but twisting it with a sharp, uncomfortable edge. Mr. Bobinski's bizarre, eccentric way of speaking adds an entirely different flavor to the script. His sentences tumble over each other, filled with absurdities and unpredictable logic. You think winning a medal makes you special? Perhaps, but it also makes you fat. His words aren't always logical, but they're filled with character. Every time he speaks, the script uses his confusion to deepen the weirdness of the world without needing to spell things out. Same goes for Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, whose theatrical ramblings are as much about character as they are about tone. Their dialogue is overdramatic, stuffed with flowery words and vague prophecies, perfectly in line with their personalities and their role in the story. The script is also loaded with small, impactful moments of emotional weight. It doesn't need heavy speeches to deliver feelings. A simple, "I love you" from Coraline's real mother, said in passing, hits harder than anything grand because it finally comes without distraction or annoyance. It's not just about what's said. It's about when it's said. Timing is everything in this script. Moments that seem small become huge because of the emotional context that's been carefully built. One of the most chilling lines in the film comes from the other mother during the moment Coraline finally resists. "You know I love you." It's said sweetly, but with venom under the surface. That line captures the twisted, possessive version of love the beldam offers. It's not love, it's control. The way the script uses language to disguise manipulation is one of its most powerful storytelling tools. The beauty of Coraline's dialogue is that it never wastes words. It builds character. It hints at mystery. It draws you in, line by line, sometimes without you even realizing. Conversations are loaded with meaning that only becomes clear in hindsight. The script trusts silence too, letting the visuals do the talking when needed. But when the characters speak, it matters. Whether it's Coraline's defiance, the beldam's false affection, or the ghost children's warnings wrapped in riddles, the words in this film carry weight. They guide the tone, define the relationships, and wrap the whole eerie world in a layer of storybook poetry, with just enough bite to keep it grounded. It's a script that whispers when it could shout, unsettles when it could comfort, and lets the story breathe through dialogue that's as precise as it is powerful. Coraline plays in the genre sandbox of dark fantasy, gothic horror, and coming-of-age adventure, but instead of sticking to the usual rules, it flips many of them upside down, then stitches them back together with buttons and shadow. This is a film that knows what kind of story it's telling, a tale of portals and monsters and childhood bravery, but it refuses to do it the easy way. It doesn't sugarcoat the darkness. It doesn't simplify the magic. And it definitely doesn't treat its young audience like they can't handle a little existential dread. Right out of the gate, Coraline signals that it's not a standard children's fantasy. There's no whimsical fairy godmother, no chosen one prophecy, and no magical sidekick delivering comic relief on cue. Instead, it starts with loneliness, neglect, and gray skies. Coraline is already a flawed protagonist, not some blank slate waiting to be transformed. That already pushes against genre expectations. In most kids' fantasies, the hero starts out innocent and learns to be brave. Coraline starts out stubborn and learns to be wise. That difference alone reshapes the emotional arc of the story and gives the film a surprising edge. The fantasy elements are presented with a delicious creep factor, more in line with psychological horror than family-friendly adventure. The magical world Coraline discovers behind the tiny door should feel like a dream come true. But the film plays with genre conventions by making everything too perfect. The food is tastier, the weather is better, and the other parents smile too much. It's unsettling in the most satisfying way. Instead of using fantasy to escape problems, the film uses fantasy to lure its protagonist into a trap. That reversal turns the genre on its head. Here, magic doesn't fix your life. It tests it. And then there's the horror. Coraline never goes for cheap scares. It doesn't throw in jumpy moments or rely on shrieking music cues. It goes deeper than that. It lets horror build slowly, through uncanny silences, symmetrical smiles, dull eyes, and whispered warnings from walls. The beldam isn't a screeching villain with a cape. She's a maternal figure with a spoonful of sugar and a sewing needle, which makes her terrifying. The way the film blends horror into a children's narrative without ever crossing into gratuitous territory is genius. It respects the intelligence of its audience. It knows that psychological tension hits harder than gore. That horror doesn't need to scream. It can hum a lullaby in a cracked porcelain voice and chill you to the bone. There's humor, too, but it's not constant or forced. It bubbles up in odd little moments. Mr. Bobinski talking to mice like a deranged coach, Miss Spink and Miss Forcible bickering over their past stage glories, Coraline herself throwing sarcastic shade. The humor comes from character, not from punchlines. That keeps it grounded and never breaks the tone. The comedy adds texture, not distraction. It also helps keep the mood from becoming oppressive. You're never allowed to feel totally comfortable, but you're also not trapped in relentless darkness. The film balances its emotional beats with the same care it applies to its visuals. The suspense is finely tuned. The story unfolds with the pacing of a mystery. Coraline is constantly investigating, uncovering clues, testing limits. There's a subtle detective structure underneath the fantasy, which keeps the audience engaged not just through fear, but through curiosity. What's behind the door? Why is the other mother so nice? What's the deal with the doll? The genre blends here like ink and water, fantasy feeding the horror, horror driving the mystery, mystery deepening the emotional core. Drama is baked into the relationships, not just the plot. Coraline's frustrations with her parents, her yearning to be heard, her struggle to decide what home really means, these themes are delivered through genre, not in spite of it. That's where the film's emotional power lives. Most genre films would pause the story to deliver the heart. Coraline hides its heart inside the story itself. Every horror beat is an emotional beat. Every fantasy trick is a test of her emotional growth. And it all feels fresh. Sure, it nods to genre classics. The hidden door evokes Alice in Wonderland. The doppelgangers whisper the Twilight Zone. The house is pure gothic haunted mansion, but it doesn't rely on nostalgia or tropes. It uses them as raw material to craft something unique. Even the idea of the evil other mother feels new because of how carefully the film avoids cliché. The beldam doesn't just want Coraline's life. She wants her soul, but not in a fire and brimstone way. She wants it through manipulation, through false love, through a smile that promises the world but demands blindness in return. That's genre subversion at its finest. The film never forgets what it is. It's dark. It's strange. It's about a girl who battles an ancient evil that hides in needle and thread, pretending to love her. But it's also about childhood and growing up and learning that sometimes you have to be your own hero, even when the monsters look like parents, and the scariest thing is choosing reality over illusion. Coraline doesn't run from its genre. It sharpens it, stitches new ideas into old patterns, and dares you to follow it through the door, even if you're not sure you'll come back the same. Coraline might look like a gothic children's fantasy on the surface, but just beneath that eerie layer of button-eyed villains and dreamlike illusions, it delivers a surprisingly sharp commentary on social and cultural dynamics, particularly around themes of parenting, escapism, consumerism, emotional neglect, and the modern family unit. The brilliance of it lies in how naturally these ideas are embedded into the narrative. Nothing feels forced, and yet the film quietly critiques a whole range of real-world issues through metaphor, tone, and character dynamics. Start with the most immediate and relatable layer, the emotional disconnection between Coraline and her parents. This isn't just a family with a few bad days. Coraline's parents are too busy, too tired, too distracted to listen. They work from home, consumed by their laptops and deadlines, glued to their screens. The dinner is bland, the conversations are clipped, and the emotional warmth is replaced with practical indifference. This isn't played as villainy, it's presented as ordinary. That's what makes it sting. The film shines a light on the modern family structure, where work often takes precedence over bonding, where screens replace shared experiences, and where children quietly fade into the background. Coraline doesn't run from home because she's mistreated. She runs because she's unseen, and that subtle distinction speaks volumes. The film also critiques the illusion of perfect satisfaction that modern culture tries to sell us, especially to kids. The other world is a metaphor for consumerist fantasy, every desire fulfilled, every craving answered instantly, everything tailored just for you. But it's all fake. It's surface-level joy masking control. This touches directly on the dangers of overindulgence and convenience culture. Coraline gets everything she wants, but only because the other mother wants something in return. That's a cautionary message about quick gratification, the danger of getting used to always hearing yes, and the trap of trading autonomy for comfort. It reflects a generation raised on tailored content, algorithm-driven entertainment, and over-curated lives, reminding viewers that reality, with all its flaws, is worth fighting for. The film's portrayal of the beldam goes deeper into cultural commentary about toxic affection and manipulative authority figures. On the surface, the other mother is nurturing, cheerful, endlessly supportive, but she's also controlling, possessive, and deeply predatory. She offers love, but it comes with a catch. You must give up your voice, your choice, your sight. This dynamic parallels real-world experiences with emotional manipulation, especially within family structures or relationships where affection is weaponized. The beldam's love isn't generous, it's conditional. That's a powerful way to expose how sometimes even care and warmth can become tools for domination, especially when there's an imbalance of power. There's also an underlying feminist commentary that runs through the entire film. Coraline is a young girl navigating a world where she's constantly told what she should accept: dull food, boring routines, emotional neglect. And when she's offered escape, it comes in the form of a twisted version of femininity, the other mother, all domestic perfection and performative love. Coraline's journey is about rejecting both extremes. She doesn't want cold neglect, but she also won't settle for artificial love that requires her obedience. She carves her own path, not defined by what others want from her, but by her own courage and self-worth. It's an empowering arc that challenges traditional gender roles in subtle but meaningful ways. Coraline is never rescued. She rescues herself. The film also hints at generational trauma through the ghost children. These are former victims who are lured in by the same false promises Coraline is offered. They represent the voices of those who fell for the illusion, who gave in to the fantasy, and who were silenced, literally. Their souls were taken. Their stories hidden. There's a cultural resonance here about the cost of silence, the importance of breaking cycles, and the power of reclaiming your narrative. When Coraline chooses to confront the beldam and free the trapped souls, she's not just saving them, she's refusing to let history repeat itself. That's a quietly powerful message about accountability and resistance. Even the neighbors reflect broader cultural quirks and social observations. Mr. Bobinski, Miss Spink, and Miss Forcible all live slightly outside reality, lost in their past glories, eccentric routines, or imagined worlds. They're charming but disconnected, exaggerated versions of adults who've stopped growing and instead retreat into nostalgia or delusion. These side characters are not deeply judgmental portrayals, but they do highlight how people often insulate themselves from reality when it becomes too dull or painful. Coraline interacts with them with a mix of confusion, amusement, and later, understanding, just as we often view the older generations with both detachment and eventual empathy. The film also nods at themes of surveillance and privacy through the doll that spies on Coraline. The idea of being watched, studied, manipulated without your knowledge taps into modern anxieties about technology, data collection, and loss of personal freedom. The other mother's gaze is ever-present, and her surveillance is tied to her power. She sees Coraline's wants before Coraline even says them. It's not a direct tech critique, but the metaphor is impossible to miss in today's world of algorithm-driven predictions and personalized content. Coraline's resistance to being observed becomes symbolic of resisting control and reclaiming autonomy. And woven through all of this is a cultural critique about how society treats children. Often patronized, often ignored, rarely taken seriously. Coraline doesn't paint its child protagonist as naive or incapable. It shows her being more perceptive, braver, and more emotionally intelligent than many of the adults around her. That's a message in itself. Children notice more than we think. They process emotional neglect, manipulation, and fear. The film gives voice to that inner world and respects it enough not to dilute its edges. Coraline doesn't shout its commentary. It doesn't wave a flag. It weaves these cultural observations into every set, every line of dialogue, every button-eye smile. That's what makes it effective. The film never pauses to deliver a message. It lets you feel the message. It embeds it into its story, and by the end, you're not just entertained, you're a little unsettled, a little wiser, and maybe seeing your world, your family, and your choices in a new light. That's the kind of storytelling that lingers. That's commentary done right. Coraline doesn't just ask the audience to watch, it dares them to feel. This is the kind of film that sneaks up on you emotionally. It begins with intrigue and curiosity, gently lays down breadcrumbs of wonder and suspicion, and then slowly tightens its grip until you're locked into the journey, with your heart pounding and your mind racing. The emotional resonance isn't loud or theatrical. It's subtle, eerie, and deeply human, drawing from fears and longings that are universal across age groups. It's a rare film that speaks to both children and adults at the same time, and yet tells two slightly different stories to each. For kids, it taps directly into that aching sense of being unheard or misunderstood. When Coraline rolls her eyes at her distracted parents or sighs at the blandness of dinner, children in the audience instantly get it. There's a powerful empathy built in from the start. Coraline doesn't need to be likable in a polished way. She's allowed to be messy, grumpy, impulsive, and that makes her deeply relatable. The film validates the small frustrations and emotional growing pains of childhood, and that validation hits with surprising strength. For adults, the emotional reaction often comes with guilt, reflection, and recognition. The tired, work-obsessed parents aren't villains, they're familiar. The film doesn't demonize them, but it holds up a mirror. How often do we get so wrapped in stress and screens and to-do lists that we miss the people closest to us? Coraline triggers introspection without ever preaching. That's what makes it powerful. It lets emotion grow naturally, often in silence. A passing glance, a neglected comment, a quiet moment between characters where everything not said echoes louder than dialogue. The turning point that truly grips the audience is when Coraline realizes the other world isn't a dream but a trap. That tonal shift from playful fantasy to creeping dread is masterfully handled, and it sends a wave of tension that changes the viewer's entire perspective. The sewn-on buttons, once a charming quirk, suddenly become a symbol of erasure. That moment where the other mother asks Coraline to sew buttons into her eyes is unforgettable. The reaction is visceral, shock, fear, revulsion. For many viewers, especially younger ones, it's a core memory kind of moment. It's a simple request, but it carries deep psychological horror. It's the film's way of saying, comfort without choice is a prison. Then there's the excitement, the kind that comes from discovery and bravery. Coraline's exploration of the house, her descent into the twisted remnants of the other world, and her ultimate face-off with the beldam are all steeped in suspense and emotional weight. Every challenge she faces feels earned. Every small victory makes your heart race. When she outsmarts the beldam and uses cleverness over brute strength, the audience feels triumph, not because it's flashy, but because it's smart and satisfying. The film also invites repeated viewings in a way that few animated features do. The first time through, you're wrapped up in Coraline's perspective. The second time, you start seeing the clues, the way the other world is tailored to manipulate her, the symbolism in the dolls, the subtle shift in tone, the foreshadowing hidden in conversations and props. And on the third or fourth viewing, you start seeing yourself, either in Coraline's loneliness, the ghost children's warnings, the parents' exhaustion, or even in the seductive pull of wanting a world that just feels easier. There are scenes that consistently strike an emotional chord, no matter how many times you watch. Coraline offering to rescue the ghost children's souls. Her desperate crawl through the collapsing tunnel. The final goodbye to the other world. These aren't just plot beats. They're emotional payoffs. And what makes them land so deeply is that the film never tries to manufacture emotion with big speeches or swelling music. It trusts the story, the stakes, and the audience. Discussions inevitably follow. After the film ends, people talk, not just about the story but about what it means. Is the beldam the metaphor for toxic parenting? Is the other world a psychological construct? Did Coraline grow emotionally or simply survive? Was the cat real or symbolic? These aren't idle questions. They're proof that the story sticks. It lingers. It haunts the edges of your imagination. For kids, it becomes that movie they remember for years. For adults, it becomes the film they revisit and reinterpret. And let's not forget the emotional closure at the end. It's not grand or overly sentimental. It's quiet and grounded. Coraline reconnects with her real parents in small, meaningful gestures, a garden being planted, a smile shared, a sense of being seen. That moment lands not because it's dramatic, but because of the emotional road we took to get there. It's the kind of ending that leaves you still thinking, still feeling, as the credits roll. Coraline doesn't pull tears from you in obvious ways. It doesn't try to make you laugh with punchlines or shock you with gore. Instead, it plays the long game. It plants seeds of unease, wonder, sadness, and hope, and lets them grow inside you. The reactions it elicits are quiet but lasting. Goosebumps that come in waves. Smiles that come with reflection. Questions that don't need easy answers. It's not just a movie you watch. It's one you carry with you, tucked somewhere deep, right behind the button-eyed door of your own imagination. Coraline doesn't just stand among similar films in its genre. It carves out its own secret door, locks it behind itself, and dares the others to follow. It belongs to that unique realm of animated dark fantasy that walks the fine line between children's storytelling and psychological horror, and while it shares DNA with a handful of eerie, emotionally rich tales, it distinguishes itself in tone, style, and lasting impact. When compared to other films of its kind, particularly those from studios like Laika or directors like Tim Burton and Henry Selick, it both honors tradition and sets a new standard. Let's start with the obvious parallel, The Nightmare Before Christmas. Although Tim Burton often gets the credit, it was Henry Selick who directed it, and Coraline feels like a natural evolution of the techniques, themes, and aesthetics established there. But while Nightmare is more musical, whimsical, and rooted in the rhythms of Halloween pageantry, Coraline is quieter, moodier, and more emotionally nuanced. It trades the theatrical for the psychological. Instead of a holiday mashup, we get a fairy tale soaked in dread and longing. If Nightmare is a gothic opera, Coraline is a slow-burning ghost story told under a blanket with a flashlight. Then there's Corpse Bride, which feels like it could exist in the same artistic universe. Pale characters, intricate stop-motion, themes of longing and identity, but Coraline edges it out in terms of world-building and emotional complexity. Corpse Bride leans into romantic melancholy. Coraline leans into psychological suspense. Where Corpse Bride ends with soft music and sacrifice, Coraline ends with a sense of earned empowerment and emotional closure. It's not just about what's beautiful, it's about what's brave. Compared to other Laika productions like Paranorman or Kubo and the Two Strings, Coraline stands as the studio's foundational masterwork. Paranorman shares some tonal similarities, especially with its balance of childhood angst and supernatural threat, and Kubo delivers stunning visuals and emotional depth, but neither hits that perfect intersection of atmosphere, innovation, and dread quite the way Coraline does. Where Kubo feels more mythological and action-driven, Coraline remains tightly focused and intimate, locked within the confines of one house, one girl, and one terrifying truth. It's not an epic. It's a haunting. If you place Coraline next to something like Spirited Away, you'll find surprising overlap. Both feature young girls navigating magical, dangerous realms full of seductive wonder and lurking peril. Both explore themes of identity, courage, and independence. But Spirited Away has a dreamlike flow steeped in Japanese myth and surreal logic, while Coraline is grounded in a Western Gothic sensibility. It's less about spiritual transformation and more about emotional survival. And unlike Spirited Away, which sometimes moves like a watercolor painting in motion, Coraline has a tighter, more suspense-driven pace. It pulls you forward with a thread, and you never quite know what's on the other end. When compared to live-action stories with similar structures, like Pan's Labyrinth, the emotional stakes of Coraline still hold up. while Pan's Labyrinth is darker and more tragic and definitely aimed at an older audience. Both films use fantasy as a lens to process trauma, fear, and growing up in a harsh world. Coraline just packages that emotional weight in a more accessible but no less powerful way. In terms of stop-motion animation itself, Coraline set a new bar for what was possible. The level of detail in every prop, fabric texture, and lighting choice was groundbreaking at the time. Compared to earlier efforts like James and the Giant Peach, another Selick creation, Coraline is far more controlled, polished, and narratively cohesive. It doesn't wander. It's lean and deliberate. Every beat has weight. Every shot has purpose. What also sets Coraline apart is how it manages to feel completely original despite drawing from a long tradition of portal fantasies. Films like Alice in Wonderland or The Chronicles of Narnia rely on sweeping transformations and whimsical discovery. Coraline flips the fantasy premise on its head. Instead of escaping to a better world, she discovers that the ideal version of her life is a meticulously designed prison. The story becomes a rejection of fantasy escapism. That's rare in the genre. It's not just a journey through a magical world, it's a journey away from one. Even within the realm of children's horror, think Monster House, Goosebumps, or Frankenweenie, Coraline remains the most psychologically mature. Those films play with fright in a fun, often campy way. Coraline doesn't wink at its audience. It stares unblinking. It doesn't just spook, it unsettles. The horror isn't a monster under the bed. It's a warm voice that offers you everything you've ever wanted, then asks you to close your eyes forever. And finally, when placed alongside more formulaic animated films that prioritize noise, humor, and rapid pacing, Coraline is practically meditative. It's confident enough to be slow, brave enough to be quiet. It knows its audience can sit in silence and squirm in discomfort, and that kind of trust is what makes it linger. So while it nods to its gothic cousins and shares shadowy corners with other coming-of-age fantasies, Coraline ultimately steps away from the crowd, carrying its own lantern, illuminating a path that no one else quite dared to carve. It's not just another entry in the genre. It's the one the others look over their shoulder at. Coraline is one of those films where nearly every frame is laced with symbolism and metaphor, woven into the walls of the pink palace, stitched into the buttons, hidden behind every shadowy corner. It doesn't just tell a story on the surface. It invites you to look deeper, to peel back the wallpaper and notice the quiet details that pulse beneath. These visual and thematic layers transform the film from a spooky children's fantasy into a haunting meditation on identity, control, reality, and emotional neglect. The most obvious and most chilling symbol is the button. On the surface, buttons are harmless, everyday objects. But in Coraline, they become symbols of control and submission. The other mother's demand that Coraline sew buttons into her eyes isn't just a creepy detail, it's a metaphor for willful blindness. Accepting the other world's pleasures requires giving up autonomy, curiosity, and perception. The button eyes turn people into dolls, pretty, obedient, hollow. When Coraline refuses to trade her eyes, she isn't just rejecting the beldam's offer. She's declaring that she wants to see the world for what it really is, even if it's flawed. That one choice echoes through the entire story. The doll itself, the one that spies on Coraline before she even discovers the portal, is a metaphorical Trojan horse. It looks like a gift, a harmless toy, but it carries hidden intent. It's a silent observer, used by the other mother to learn Coraline's fears, wants, and habits. It represents manipulation disguised as affection. The doll is a stand-in for false comfort, for the subtle ways people or forces can influence us when we're not paying attention. Coraline's rejection of the doll is another moment of clarity, a refusal to be watched, a reclamation of privacy. Then there's the portal. The tiny door in the wall is both literal and symbolic. It represents the temptation to escape reality, to run from boredom, sadness, or neglect. The tunnel Coraline crawls through changes over time, bright and inviting at first, then twisted and suffocating as the truth reveals itself. The physical transformation of the tunnel reflects her psychological journey. The deeper she goes, the more distorted the illusion becomes. The door is more than an entrance, it's a mirror. What Coraline finds on the other side isn't just another world. It's her own emotional hunger reflected back at her, distorted into something dangerous. Food also plays a powerful symbolic role. In the real world, meals are cold, gray, flavorless. In the other world, everything is vibrant, steaming, abundant, almost too perfect. The food is bait, a metaphor for emotional nourishment Coraline feels she lacks at home. But it's not real. It's carefully crafted to keep her there, to hook her. Like fairy tales of old, where enchanted food binds you to the realm you eat it in, the beldam's feasts are part of the trap. Coraline's eventual refusal to indulge represents her awakening. She stops craving fantasy and starts craving truth. The garden in the other world, shaped like Coraline's face, is a powerful piece of visual metaphor. On one hand, it's flattering, nature blooming in her image. But on the other hand, it's deeply unsettling. It's not really a tribute. It's ownership. The other mother doesn't just want to please Coraline. She wants to possess her, mold her into something she controls completely. The garden, instead of symbolizing freedom and beauty, becomes a twisted version of identity theft. It shows how admiration can quickly shift into obsession. Even the cat, who slinks through the story as Coraline's cryptic ally, serves as a living metaphor. He has no name, no allegiance, no need for approval. He slips between worlds, sees what others can't, and refuses to be claimed. He's the embodiment of independence and perception. He guides Coraline, but never tells her what to do. He asks questions, offers cryptic advice, and trusts her to make her own choices. In a world full of control and manipulation, the cat represents clarity and free will. That he can speak only in the other world further reinforces the idea that Coraline is learning to listen in a place that initially only seemed to flatter her ears. The ghost children, silent, hollow-eyed remnants of those who came before, carry the story's heaviest metaphor. They are the cautionary voices of history, the victims of seduction and surrender. They represent what happens when we accept love without boundaries, comfort without truth. Their fate is a chilling reminder of what Coraline could become. When she chooses to save them, she's not just freeing their souls, she's breaking the cycle. She's refusing to become another voiceless doll. Their whispered warnings aren't just exposition. They're symbols of lost potential and the weight of the past. Even the neighbors, Mr. Bobinski, Miss Spink, and Miss Forcible, function on a symbolic level. Each one exists on the edge of reality, consumed by their eccentricities and stuck in past glories. They're not just comic relief. They're exaggerated reflections of adult stagnation, the way people retreat into routine or memory rather than confront change. In the other world, they become grotesque parodies of themselves, performing endlessly, exaggerated to the point of horror. Their transformations represent how the beldam exploits nostalgia and vanity to keep her victims pacified. Color is also a crucial symbolic tool. The real world is desaturated, full of grays and dull tones, until Coraline begins to see it with new eyes. As she reclaims agency, the real world becomes richer, more textured. The other world, though initially lush and bright, begins to lose color and crumble the longer Coraline stays. The visual palette mirrors her emotional arc, illusion fades. Truth sharpens. And let's not forget the sewing motif that runs through the entire film. The beldam's world is handmade, carefully stitched together, crafted to deceive. But there's always something a little off about it, seams showing, threads unraveling. The act of sewing becomes a metaphor for control, for reshaping reality to fit one's desires. The beldam is a creator, but a twisted one. Her craft is manipulation. Her handiwork is horror. The way Coraline undoes that thread, quite literally, in her final confrontation, is symbolic of her taking back her story, her vision, her voice. Coraline doesn't just hide meanings, it dares you to find them. It's not a film that explains itself. It shows you a button and waits to see if you'll sew it in or pull it off. The metaphors breathe just under the surface, always watching, always listening, much like the beldam herself. And once you notice them, You can't unsee them. The beauty of Coraline is that it's never just about what's happening. It's about why it's happening, and what those silent threads are really trying to say. Coraline doesn't exist within a traditional franchise, and it's certainly not a historical film, but its place in cinematic history, and especially in the evolution of stop-motion animation, is absolutely monumental. This is a standalone story, but its ripple effect has been massive. It arrived not as a chapter in a larger saga, but as a bold declaration of what animation could be when unchained from formula and fearless in tone. And while it may not carry a sequel or a sprawling universe behind it, Coraline became a cornerstone, an origin point that redefined the landscape of dark animated storytelling and carved out a space for Leica Studios in the cinematic conversation. When Coraline was released in 2009, it marked the debut feature film of Leica, a studio that wasn't just dipping a toe into animation, it cannonballed in with a fully formed vision. Before this, stop motion was mostly associated with holiday specials, quirky side projects, or the occasional Tim Burton Gothic adventure. But Coraline announced that stop motion could be serious. It could be complex, beautiful, layered, unsettling, and emotionally resonant. It didn't need musical numbers or talking animals cracking jokes every 10 seconds. It could be art. It could be literature come to life. Leica's decision to adapt Neil Gaiman's novella into such a visually intricate and emotionally mature film was, at the time, a risk. Most animated films in the 2000s were dominated by computer animation from Pixar or DreamWorks. Audiences were used to sleek, clean, digitally rendered worlds full of fast cuts and broad appeal. But Coraline rejected that mold entirely. It leaned into texture, into shadow, into silence. And in doing so, it stood out like a stitched-up thumb in a sea of CGI fingers. It was Leica planting its flag, saying, "We're not here to follow trends. We're here to haunt them." The film's release also came at a pivotal moment for storytelling and animation. It arrived between the emotional family-focused stories of early Pixar and the more self-aware, reference-heavy comedies that began dominating animated features. Coraline didn't play to parents with pop culture jokes. It didn't talk down to kids. It offered mystery, metaphor, and moral ambiguity in a package that felt dangerous in the best way. Historically, that made it a turning point, a reminder that children's stories didn't have to be safe to be meaningful. They could be dark and still be deeply respectful of young minds. And, because it was adapted from a Neil Gaiman story, Coraline also sits within the broader context of literary horror and fantasy. Gaiman's work is known for its blend of whimsy and existential fear, and Coraline captures that tone perfectly. It's a modern fairy tale in the truest sense, not sanitized, but sharp. Not moralistic, but filled with quiet lessons. The film brings that literary sensibility into the visual realm, proving that children's media can draw from sophisticated source material without losing accessibility. In terms of its influence, Coraline helped launch a mini-renaissance of darker-toned animated stories. Without Coraline, it's hard to imagine films like Paranorman, The Box Trolls, or even non-Leica films like Monster House and Wendell and Wild gaining traction. It shifted the perception of what a family film could look like. It reminded audiences and creators that kids can handle fear, mystery, and ambiguity when it's presented with care and intelligence. Beyond film, Coraline has become something of a cultural landmark. It's the kind of movie that grew in popularity after its initial release, gaining a massive cult following through word of mouth, fan theories, rewatch analyses, and online discourse. Its imagery, the buttons, the door, the cat, have become modern myth. The film's influence echoes in fashion, in music videos, in indie animation, even in the aesthetic of internet horror fiction. It tapped into something primal, something folkloric, and gave it a contemporary shape. In the grand context of stop-motion history, Coraline sits alongside legends. It took the painstaking craft of hand-built puppetry and set design and elevated it with cutting-edge techniques like 3D printing for facial expressions. It honored the legacy of Ray Harryhausen and Rankin Slash Bass while pushing the medium into uncharted, expressive territory. Watching Coraline is like watching an art form evolve before your eyes, frame by frame, stitch by stitch. And while it has no direct sequel, and likely never will, Coraline feels more complete and self-contained because of that. It doesn't exist to set up a trilogy or a cinematic universe. It tells one story, with enough depth and mystery to keep audiences coming back. In that way, its franchise is less about future installments and more about legacy. Its roots spread across genres, studios, and storytelling styles. Every time a filmmaker tries to blend fantasy and horror in a way that respects young viewers' intelligence, they owe a little something to Coraline. So while Coraline may not be part of a franchise in the traditional sense, it's the spiritual cornerstone of a movement. It created a standard, a tone, a template for the brave and the strange. In the historical context of animation, it's less a stepping stone and more a towering figure, casting a long, eerie shadow that invites others to follow, if they're willing to crawl through the door. Coraline might seem like a quiet little stop-motion gem, but behind its handcrafted curtains and carefully stitched-up seams is a surprisingly bold financial story, a story of risk, artistry, and the kind of payoff that doesn't just measure in dollars, but in long-lasting cultural currency. On paper, this wasn't a safe bet. It wasn't a sequel. It wasn't backed by a massive merchandising empire. And it wasn't animated in the high-gloss, hyperactive CGI style that dominated box offices at the time. No, Coraline went rogue. It used stop-motion animation. It went dark. It leaned into eerie silence and hand-built wonder. And yet, it still made money, and more importantly, it made a mark. Let's start with the numbers. The reported budget for Coraline sat at around $60 million. Now, for an animated film, especially one made in stop motion, that's no small chunk of change. Every puppet, every set piece, every subtle movement of Coraline's blue hair was built and adjusted by hand, frame by frame, often taking weeks to capture just a few seconds of footage. It's a labor-intensive process that doesn't come cheap. But when you watch the final product, that budget feels justified in every thread and shadow. The detail is absurd in the best way. You can see the textures on the walls. You can count the fibers in Coraline's sweater. The animation doesn't feel mass-produced. It feels curated, like a work of art that just happens to move. Now, onto the box office. Coraline pulled in about $125 million worldwide, with roughly $75 million coming from the domestic market. So yes, it doubled its budget. It wasn't a billion-dollar juggernaut, but it didn't need to be. For a debut film from a brand-new studio using a niche animation style, that was a triumph. Not only did it recoup its costs, but it signaled to the industry that there was an audience for dark fantasy, even in the animated realm. And not just kids dragging their parents. Everyone showed up.
Teens.
Adults. Animation nerds. Gothic fiction fans. Neil Gaiman readers. People who didn't even know they liked stop motion until this film came along. Part of that success came down to the marketing strategy. The trailers played like puzzle boxes, revealing just enough of the strange, beautiful, creepy world to get under your skin, but never spoiling the full scope of the story. The promotional materials leaned into the film's mystery and handcrafted feel. Some theaters even gave out limited edition 3D glasses and Coraline keys, turning the movie-going experience into an event. Leica understood that their film wasn't just something to watch, it was something to enter. And they invited audiences in with a whisper, not a shout. Word of mouth also played a huge role. Audiences who expected a cute, Tim Burton-style adventure got something deeper, weirder, and far more emotionally potent. That surprise turned into buzz. People talked about the button eyes. They discussed the darker-than-expected tone. They praised the visuals. Coraline became the kind of movie people recommended. And that's often more valuable than any ad campaign. It moved quietly, like the cat in the film, slipping through conversations, showing up on "you have to watch this" lists, and gradually building its legend. Critics also helped push its success. The reviews praised its innovation, its emotional depth, and its refusal to dumb things down for kids. Parents didn't just tolerate it, they loved it too. Teachers recommended it for its literary value. Animation lovers praised the technical wizardry. It found allies in all corners, and that support kept it alive long after opening weekend. And here's where things get even more interesting. Coraline's financial value wasn't just in its initial theatrical run. Over the years, it's become a cult classic. DVD and Blu-ray sales, streaming viewership, collector's editions, merchandise. All of that has contributed to the film's long-term profitability. Leica built its brand on this single release, and it paid off. The studio has since produced other high-quality stop-motion films, but Coraline remains its crown jewel, the one that established trust with audiences and credibility with critics. What makes this financial story so compelling is that it proves something rare. Bold artistic choices can be profitable. A dark, female-led fairy tale with no franchise backing, built entirely out of physical objects and shadows, managed to compete in a market dominated by superheroes, sequels, and slapstick-heavy CGI. It didn't compromise to be commercial. It trusted that quality, originality, and emotional depth could attract an audience. And it was right. So while Coraline might not have lit up the box office with record-breaking numbers, it did something arguably more impressive. It turned a risky creative experiment into a profitable film, launched a studio, redefined what animation could look like, and built a legacy that continues to earn not just money, but reverence. And in a world full of loud, overproduced blockbusters, that quiet success speaks volumes. Right now, Coraline is widely available in multiple formats, perfect for sets of eyes that love both comfort and a little chill. Streaming subscription. The film is currently streaming on Netflix. Availability can fluctuate, so check your region if you don't find it immediately, but fans report success finding it active. Subscription-free streaming, ad-supported. If you'd rather not pay monthly, Coraline is available on Tubi. That makes it easy to dive into its spooky world on demand, without spending a cent. Digital rental/purchase. Want the best quality? Rent or buy in HD/4K on platforms like Amazon Prime Video, Apple TV, Fandango at Home, Microsoft Store, Google Play, and Spectrum On Demand, typically around $3.99 to rent and $14.99 to buy. Apple TV and Microsoft even offer Dolby Vision or Dolby Atmos options for maximum audiovisual impact. Theatrical and immersive screenings. Surprisingly, Coraline is still making occasional appearances in theaters. Specialty screenings through Fathom Events or local cinemas often include 3D showings, so if you're after that full cinematic chill, this is a great option. Roku channel upcoming availability. According to current reports, the movie will land on Roku channel with ads starting October 1st, 2025, so add it to your watch list if you stream via Roku and like free, ad-supported viewing. Best way to watch for full impact. Thinking of an optimal viewing experience? Here's a fun breakdown. * home movie night, solo or family. Rent or buy the 4K/Dolby Atmos version for the slickest visuals and sound. Then dim the lights, crank up the volume, and let the stop-motion world draw you in. * casual stream. If you're just in the mood for a replay, the Tubi or Netflix versions offer a great experience. Just be ready for ads or occasional quality dips. * event experience. Whenever theaters run a 3D screening or special event, it's the perfect time to watch it as a spooky spectacle on the big screen, in the dark, surrounded by other fans. The richness of Coraline's artistry truly blooms in formats that honor its sound design, tactile sets, and atmospheric lighting. But no matter how you watch, the story, brimming with mystery, emotion, and imagination, remains a captivating journey every time.